My name is Dr. Robert Anderson. I'm a cognitive archaeologist. I decipher the logic of dead civilizations. Most of my work is done with fragments. A shard of a legal code, a half-erased star chart, the ghost of a philosophy buried in a grammatical structure. I reconstruct the why from the rubble of the what. The thing sitting 500 meters from our research outpost was a statement. Whole, perfect, and utterly silent. We called it the Sphinx. It was a 70-meter-tall monolith of a sitting beast, carved from a black, glassy stone. We were in West Antarctica, camped on the collapsing Thwaites Glacier, a place where the only native rock is buried under 2 miles of ice. This thing wasn't local. Dr. Peter Connolly found it. He'd spent a decade chasing fringe theories about subglacial anomalies, listening to energy signatures everyone else dismissed as noise. He was a brilliant geophysicist who had tipped over into a kind of scientific mysticism, and for once, the universe had rewarded him for it. The Sphinx was his vindication. It was also a profound physical violation of our world. It radiated a steady warmth, a thermal anomaly that kept the ice in a constant state of melt, creating a 5-meter-wide moat of slushy water around its base. It was a wound in the ice sheet, a foreign body the continent couldn't expel. For 2 months, our team at the Thwaites Anomaly Research Outpost had treated it like an unexploded bomb. Dr. Leo Fisher, our lead physicist, bombarded it with every sensor we had, trying to map its interior, to understand its power source. All he got back was paradox. Its mass didn't match its gravitational displacement. It absorbed radar and spat back neutrinos. To Leo, it was the ultimate puzzle, a beautiful insult to known physics. Dr. Abbas, our medic and psych evaluator, watched the rest of us. He monitored our vitals, our sleep patterns, our frayed nerves. He knew what this kind of isolation, coupled with this kind of cosmic pressure, did to the human mind. He was the mission's anchor, quietly documenting our descent into obsession. My job was the glyphs. They were carved into the Sphinx's throat, a cascade of symbols that weren't a language, not in any human sense. Languages are shaped by biology and environment. They have redundancies, metaphors, the messy fingerprints of a billion conversations. The Cassandra script, as I named it, had none of that. It was pure syntax, a visual representation of logical and ethical axioms. I did my work from a small, heated observation tent pitched just outside the melt zone. For weeks, the axioms were opaque. They were theorems of existence, of cause and effect, of viability. Then, 2 hours ago, I found the Rosetta Stone. It was a single glyph, a complex shape that cross-referenced 2 of the script's major theorems. And with it, the whole structure began to unlock. It was an exam syllabus. The glyphs functioned as both an invitation and a set of terms. The Sphinx was a planetary examiner. It posed challenges in logic, physics, and ethical calculus. The tests were to be conducted inside. I saw the axioms for failure, a protocol designed to trigger a rapid global winter. And for success, a single, chilling phrase: the worthy will be collected. The final piece of the translation slotted into place on my data slate. It was a coherent summary, a preamble. I had done my job, and in doing so, I had armed the bomb. I stood up. Beyond the tent's transparent shield, the Sphinx waited, impassive, its black form swallowing the light of the perpetual Antarctic sun. It had been waiting a long time. I transmitted the file. A single command on my data slate. Log and transmit. Anderson Robert. Axiomatic summary. The culmination of 2 months of cognitive archaeology, of staring at alien syntax until the patterns emerged from the noise. My report, detailing the Sphinx's function as an examiner and its binary outcomes, a global winter or collection, streamed through the quantum entanglement communicator to Mission Director Warren at McMurdo Station. It was an act of finality. I had officially delivered the prophecy. The universe didn't wait for a response. The sound came first. It was the sound of a mountain clearing its throat. Across the 500-meter expanse of ice and slush, the Sphinx answered my transmission. A section of its chest, a perfect 60-meter-tall rectangle, began to move. One moment it was a solid, featureless surface. The next, it was retracting into the monolith, grinding inward with the sound of a continent shifting. The edges of the new aperture were geometrically perfect, so sharp they seemed to cut the light. Beyond that threshold was a darkness that consumed light. Our external lamps threw beams that simply vanished at its edge, as if hitting a wall of pure nothing. "Robert, what did you do?" Leo Fisher's voice crackled in my ear. His tone was data-driven. The Sphinx flashed. A single silent pulse of blue-white energy washed over its black surface, so fast it was more an afterimage than an event. My helmet's HUD, the heads-up display projecting data across my visor, went haywire for a second. "Energy event," Fisher announced, his voice tight with the excitement of a physicist finding a new law to break. "Broad spectrum, low yield, but the signature is bizarre, nothing like the background radiation." Then a new voice cut in, overriding Fisher's channel. It was Peter Connolly, the geologist who found this thing. He was back in the science module, monitoring the deep earth sensors. His voice caught somewhere between a prayer and a scream. "Oh God! Oh my God, the pulse!" "Peter, report," I said. "The signature," he stammered, his breathing loud and wet in my ear. "Leo, I'm sending you the data. I ran it through the historical seismology archives. It's a perfect match. 1-to-1. It's identical." "Identical to what, Peter?" Fisher's voice was laced with impatience. There was a moment of static-filled silence. I could picture Connolly in the lab, staring at a truth he'd spent his whole life searching for, now wishing he'd never found it. "The Younger Dryas," he finally choked out. "The seismic marker that kicked it off. The volcanic cascade event. 12,800 years ago, the day the world froze." We convened in the HAB module, the outpost's central living and meeting space. It was a white cylinder, crammed with a communal table, 4 sleeping bunks and a galley. It was the only place at Taro designed for human comfort, and at that moment, it felt like a pressure cooker. We'd shed the outer layers of our all-environment climate suits, but the tension was thicker than any insulation. Leo Fisher paced the length of the short table, his movements sharp and agitated like a caged wolf. He was a man built of pure, frictionless intellect, and the Sphinx was the first problem he couldn't solve from the outside. "Inaction is an unacceptable variable," he began without preamble. He wasn't speaking to us so much as dictating a proof. "We have a control group of 1, the last species that was judged from this location. They apparently failed to engage, or engaged incorrectly. The result was a planetary reset. To stand here and debate is to repeat their error. The logical imperative is to enter, gather data, and solve the problem." "This is not a problem, Leo." Peter Connolly's voice was trembling, but not with fear. It was reverence. He sat hunched at the table, his gaze fixed on the porthole that framed the distant Sphinx. "This is a summons. Can't you feel the scale of this? We've been called to the holiest place on earth to stand trial. To debate is to show ourselves unworthy of the question." Fisher stopped pacing and gave a short, derisive laugh. "A trial? Peter, it's a machine. A magnificently complex one, but a machine. It's not a god, and this isn't a cathedral." Before their argument could ignite, a third voice cut through the tension. Dr. Samuel Abbas, our missions physician and psychological evaluator, sat perfectly still, his hands on the table. He was the only one who seemed unaffected by the raw existential pressure. To him, we weren't debating philosophy. We were specimens exhibiting symptoms. "Director Warren is awaiting your formal recommendation, Robert," Abbas said, his dark eyes fixing on me. "But before you make it, you should all be aware of the psychological certainties. The interior, based on Leo's sensor readings, is a non-Euclidean space. That alone is a profound neurological stressor. Add total isolation, the removal of familiar sensory input, and a direct, high-stakes cognitive challenge. I can guarantee the onset of paranoia, sensory hallucinations, and acute dissociative states within 72 hours. Your minds will become the most hostile part of the environment. That is not a risk. It is a clinical prognosis. Fisher saw a puzzle. Connolly saw a god. Abbas saw a pathogen that would attack our sanity. And I saw a rescue operation. My mind flashed back 10 years. A silent chapel, the smell of old incense, the cold stone under my knees. I was Father Anderson then, praying for my brother, Daniel, who was trapped and bleeding on a mountain in the Andes. And while I prayed, a team of professionals 1,000 miles away was deliberating. They followed protocol. They debated the safest route, the optimal time for an airlift, the risk-to-reward calculus. They made a series of sound, logical, defensible decisions, and Daniel died alone on that ledge 30 minutes before they finally reached him. He was a victim of sound procedure. I looked at the faces around the table. The brilliant physicist, the devout geologist, the clinical psychologist. They were the rescue team, debating the variables while the storm moved in. The Sphinx wasn't a mountain, and we weren't trying to save one life. We were trying to save 7 billion. And I couldn't let paralysis, no matter how rational, be the choice that killed us. "We go in," I said. "Leo's right. Inaction is a guaranteed failure. Peter's right. We've been summoned. And Sam," I met the doctor's eyes, "thank you for the warning. We'll need you to monitor us every step of the way." I turned to the comms panel, its green light blinking expectantly. "I'm making the call. Project Cassandra, team of 4, is entering the anomaly." The 500-meter walk from the outpost to the Sphinx was the longest of my life. The 4 of us moved in a staggered line, our boots crunching on the wind-scoured ice. The monolith was a black cutout against the pale, endless sky, its open doorway a perfect rectangle of void. It didn't look like an entrance so much as a wound in the world. We paused at the edge of the melt zone, the line where frozen ice gave way to dark, slushy water. A faint steam rose from the surface, a visible manifestation of the Sphinx's alien warmth. Leo Fisher was first, stepping across a narrow alloy bridge the engineering team had laid. He moved without hesitation, a man approaching a grand instrument he was born to play. Peter Connolly followed, his head bowed, his steps slow, a pilgrim at the end of his journey. Abbas went next, his posture that of a man observing a critical procedure. I was last. I took one final look back at the distant, fragile dome of Taro, a tiny bubble of human order in this kingdom of ice and enigma. Then I crossed. Stepping through was a nauseating lurch, a sensory disconnect. My eyes saw me move forward, but my inner ear registered a slight fall, a shift in gravity that didn't match the visual input. One moment I was in Antarctica, the next I wasn't. Then the door slid shut. It made no sound at all, simply ceasing to be an opening and becoming, once again, a seamless part of the wall behind us. We were sealed in. We stood in a chamber that made a mockery of geometry. The walls were made of a luminous crystalline material that emitted a shadowless white light. They met at angles that felt both sharp and obtuse at the same time, playing tricks on my depth perception. A far corner would seem miles away one moment, then only an arm's length the next. "Atmosphere is a nitrogen-argon mix." Fisher's voice was cutting through the disorienting silence. He was already tapping at the holographic interface on his wrist. "Trace elements are not on the periodic table." "Fascinating. Robert, the glyphs on the walls, are they active?" I looked. The walls were covered in the Cassandra script, but they were dark, inert. In the center of the chamber floated a pillar of the same black stone as the Sphinx's exterior. It was covered in crystalline controls. "It's a logic gate," Fisher breathed. He strode to the central pillar. "A ridiculously advanced one. The room's topology is the locking mechanism." He pointed to a set of lenses on the pillar. Light emitters. The light won't travel in a straight line. It will follow the spatial curvature. We have to bend the beams to hit those glyphs in the correct sequence. It's a key, and the lock is three-dimensional space. He was in his element, a conductor in a new and magnificent orchestra. For the next 20 minutes, he spoke through us. Connolly, your hand on that prism. Rotate it on my mark 0.07 degrees. Don't deviate. Robert, that panel to your left. I need you to modulate its frequency. Watch my signal. Sync it to the third harmonic. Abbas, you will do nothing. Stay precisely where you are. Your mass is part of the equation. He saw it all. He saw the physics as a language. He read the room, called out adjustments, orchestrated our movements with beautiful precision. Under his command, we twisted dials and angled crystals. Beams of pure white light shot from the pillar, bending in graceful arcs, skimming along walls and striking the dormant glyphs. With each correct connection, a resonant chime echoed through the chamber. One by one, the glyphs on the wall lit up. When the final beam hit the final glyph, the chimes resolved into a single, perfect chord. The sound was one of profound mathematical satisfaction. Fisher was grinning, his face flushed with triumph on my comm screen. See? It's a computer. Elegant, but logical. It can be understood. As he spoke, a section of the far wall dissolved, irising open into a new passage, a doorway into a darkness deeper than the one we had left behind. We had passed the first test. We had taken the first irrevocable step down a corridor with no exit but the one ahead. The transition was jarring. The new doorway led into a short corridor that was a perfect replica of the connecting passageway between the hab and the medbay back at Taro. The white composite walls, the texture of the non-slip floor, the specific hum of the LED lighting strips. It was all nauseatingly correct. The air cycling through my suit suddenly seemed to carry the phantom scent of antiseptic and sterilized steel. The corridor opened into the medbay itself. Biobeds lined the wall, their monitors dark. A tray of surgical instruments sat on a steel counter. It was a lifeless diorama of a place we called home, and on the central examination bed, a little girl was sitting up, swinging her legs. She wore a set of blue thermal pajamas and clutched a worn, one-eyed stuffed rabbit. She had dark, curly hair and eyes so large and brown they seemed to swallow the light. I saw Abbas freeze at the head of our small formation, his posture going rigid. On the corner of my HUD, his biometric feed, a constant stream of data I usually ignored, was screaming. Heart rate, 160. Blood pressure spiking into the red. The girl looked up. Her gaze passed over Fisher and Connolly, then landed on Abbas. A slow, sleepy smile spread across her face. "Daddy?" she said. Her voice was small, clear, and utterly real. The sound of Abbas's breath catching in his throat was a sharp crackle over the comms. He took a single, stumbling step forward, his hand rising involuntarily. "Maya?" he whispered, his clinical detachment incinerated in an instant. A sudden electronic tone filled the room, a single pulse designed to command attention without causing panic. The blank biomonitors on the wall flashed to life, displaying a cascade of Cassandra glyphs. A bright red countdown timer appeared beneath them. It started at 3 minutes. "Robert," Fisher snapped, "translation now." I tore my eyes from the scene. The syntax was simple, brutal. "There's an energy surge coming systemic. The glyphs say 98% probability of a lethal overload in this chamber. One subject will be terminated. The selection is random." I paused, my throat closing around the next part. "There's an alternative. We can divert the surge to this room, the medbay. It calls it Auxiliary Chamber Beta. The surge will be contained. It guarantees..." I looked at the little girl, who was now watching the flashing lights with wide, curious eyes. "It guarantees the termination of the biological construct. It's not a choice." Fisher's voice was a blade, slicing through the emotional chaos. "It's a variable. A test of our irrationality. It's a phantom, Abbas. A hard light projection tied to your memories. It is not your daughter. Look at her, Leo. Abbas choked out. He had taken another step, his entire being focused on the girl. She's breathing. She knows me. It's a distraction, Fisher insisted, moving to a control panel on the wall where a single glyph, the symbol for divert, was now glowing. To risk a 25% chance of our own death of mission failure for a simulation is insane. It's mathematically indefensible. Maybe math isn't what's being tested, Connolly said, his eyes alight with a feverish awe. Perhaps it is asking for a sacrifice, to see if we have the strength to offer up the innocent to protect the whole. The timer on the wall passed 2 minutes. It's a person, Leo, I said, the words feeling useless. For all intents and purposes, it is a living, feeling person. The test could be about empathy, about our refusal to treat a life as disposable. She is not a person, Fisher shot back. She is a data-driven illusion. We divert the power. The decision is made. You don't get to make that decision alone, I snapped, stepping between him and the panel. The timer hit 60 seconds. Maya, the little girl, was starting to look scared. She looked at Abbas, her lower lip trembling. Daddy, I don't like the noise. Abbas let out a sound, a broken, strangled sob. I know, sweetie. I know. He couldn't do it. He was a father, and his daughter was scared. Nothing else in the universe mattered in that moment. The debate was over. Logic, faith, empathy, they were all useless abstractions. We were out of time. The final choice fell to me. My past rushed up to meet me, the chapel, the slow rescue, the weight of a preventable death. Daniel died because of procedure, because of careful, rational hesitation. I looked at Abbas, his face a ruin of love and agony. I looked at Fisher, waiting for me to accept the hard necessity. I looked at Maya. She was real enough to be afraid. It wasn't a choice between right and wrong. It was a choice between two different kinds of damnation. The timer read 10 seconds. My hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I pushed past Fisher and slapped my glove onto the glowing glyph on the wall. The chamber lights dimmed, and a deep humming sound vibrated through the floor as the energy surge was rerouted. Maya looked at me, her expression one of simple, childish confusion. For a single second, her image dissolved into light, a cascade of golden particles. Then, she was gone. Sam Abbas fell to his knees, his raw grief echoing in our helmets. A new doorway opened in the far wall, a dark promise of the next chamber. We had survived, but we were no longer a team. We were 3 men and 1 broken soul. Fisher and I had to physically lift Abbas to his feet, his eyes fixed on the empty space where the construct of his daughter had vanished. Connolly stood apart, his head bowed, murmuring something that sounded like a prayer for the departed. There was no time to grieve. The new doorway was open, a black maw that promised no respite. We moved through it like automatons, a procession of the damned, with Abbas shuffling between me and Leo. The world on the other side was a physical assault. The hum was replaced by the thin, keening whistle of a high-altitude wind, a sound that cut right through my suit's audio dampeners. We were standing on a narrow ledge, no more than 3 feet wide, clinging to a sheer, unforgiving wall of granite. Below us was a kilometre of empty air, a dizzying, fatal drop into a sea of roiling grey clouds. The light was thin and brutal, the sky a bruised purple that promised a storm. I knew this place. This was the Andes. This was the north face of Ciudad Grande. This was the ledge from the rescue report. Unstable footing, Fisher announced. He was planting small, adhesive sensors on the rock face. The whole structure is under tectonic strain. Minimal movement. Stick to the wall. 20 meters down the ledge, half buried under a fresh fall of rock and ice, was a figure in a blue climbing jacket. One of his legs was twisted, but he was alive. I could see the puff of condensation from his mouth, could hear his shallow breathing over the howl of the wind. He stirred, his head lifting weakly. His face was pale, his lips blue, but his eyes, they were Daniel's eyes. "Robert." His voice was a weak, pain-laced rasp, but it was him. It was my brother. "Is that you? I knew you'd come." The world narrowed to a tunnel. My carefully constructed frameworks, my weighted outcome analysis, my decade of secular logical ethics, it all turned to dust and blew away on that phantom wind. It wasn't a test. This was my second chance. "Daniel," I whispered, taking a step forward. Abbas's hand clamped onto my arm. "Robert, stop!" His voice was rough, but it had a flicker of the doctor in it again. He was wounded, but his training was kicking in. "I have to get to him," I said. "Look," Fisher cut in. "Look at the situation. The rock pinning him is a 2-ton slab of granite, balanced precariously. The resources..." A small alcove near us lit up, revealing its contents. A single, fully stocked medkit. One plasma cutter with its power indicator already in the yellow. 2 rappel lines. The lines are 20 meters short of reaching that outcropping below. The cutter's battery is only good for 60 seconds of continuous use, not enough to get through the main slab. Using it on the smaller rocks risks destabilizing the whole thing. He was right. I knew he was right. This place had crafted a perfect nightmare. It had given me back my brother, but it had made saving him a logical impossibility. It was a test of my paralysis. "We have to try," I said, sorting through the variables. I could use the cutter in short bursts, maybe fracture the rock. I could splice the ropes, but it would be a weak point. The medkit had 1 syringe of cryostasis compound, a drug that could put him in a suspended state, but we'd still have to move him. "Robert!" Daniel's voice called out again, weaker this time. "It's so cold!" That was the phrase from the rescuer's log, the last thing he said. My intellectual fortress crumbled into rubble. I was just a man on a ledge, 10 years in the past, watching my brother die all over again. I couldn't move. The sheer number of choices, each with a high probability of failure and death, locked my limbs in place. It was all happening again. "Robert, make a decision." Fisher's voice was like grinding stone. "Sentiment is a catastrophic liability. Either we attempt a high-risk extraction, or we preserve resources and move on. Choose." My breath was fogging the inside of my visor. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at Daniel, at my own failure made manifest. Then, Abbas was in front of me, his hand on my shoulder, forcing me to look at him. "Robert, listen to my voice," he said, his tone commanding. "This isn't Daniel. You know it isn't. The last chamber took my daughter. This one is taking your brother. It's a pathogen. It finds the wound and it infects it. Don't let it win." His words were an anchor in the storm. "He's right, Robert," Connolly murmured from behind us. "This is a trial of the soul. It asks us to see past the flesh." I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them. The decision was the only thing left. "Leo, the cutter, short bursts, aim for the fracture lines on the smaller rocks. Let's see if we can relieve the pressure without bringing the whole mountain down on us." The plasma cutter sputtered and died after 30 seconds. It was just enough time to slice through one of the smaller secondary rocks, pinning Daniel's construct in place. The massive granite slab above him groaned, shifted by a millimeter, and then settled again, more precariously than before. My gamble had failed. It had only made things worse. Daniel looked at me. "It's okay, Robert," he whispered, the wind snatching the words away. "You tried." Then his form began to dissolve into a fine grey dust that the wind caught and scattered into the roiling clouds below. The rocks, the ledge, the very mountain under our feet faded with him, the entire hyper-realistic scene dissolving into the featureless white light. The wail of the wind was replaced by that same deep, cellular silence. We were standing in a perfect empty sphere. In the center of the white space was a single object, a waist-high plinth of the same black stone as the Sphinx's exterior. There were no controls, just the plinth, and on the wall directly behind it, a new set of glyphs. "It learns," Fisher muttered. He was recalibrating his sensors. It presented a no-win scenario based on your psychological profile. When you failed to resolve it, the test terminated. I ignored him. My focus was on the glyphs. The translation was immediate. "The worthy offer that which is most precious," I read aloud. "The unworthy withhold it." Connolly took a step forward. A strange, rapturous light had entered his eyes. He looked from the plinth to the glyphs, and a slow, beatific smile spread across his face. "Of course," he breathed. "It's so simple, so beautiful." He looked at us, his expression one of pity, as if we were children who couldn't grasp a simple truth. "It's been preparing us. It showed Sam the price of attachment. It showed Robert the futility of struggle. Now it's asking for the final proof, an act of pure faith, a true offering." He reached up with both hands and began to unlock the seals on his helmet. "Peter, stop," I said. "This isn't a choice, Robert," he said, his fingers working at the neck ring. "It's an honor. Our lives are the most precious thing we have. It wants to see if we understand that value by being willing to surrender it." The helmet hissed as the seal broke. I lunged. It was clumsy in the bulky suit, more of a desperate falling tackle than a controlled movement. I hit him at the waist, and we went down together, the impact a muffled thud on the floor. He fought back, trying to pull the helmet the rest of the way off. "Blasphemy!" he gasped, his face contorted with righteous fury on my comms feed. "You're refusing grace. You're damning us all with your pride." "A god that demands a blood sacrifice is a monster, Peter," I shot back, pinning his arms. "We are not its property to be offered up." "Fools." Fisher's voice was a whip crack. He hadn't moved to help. He was standing by the plinth, a look of intellectual disgust on his face. "Stop your pathetic theological drama and look. It's a machine. It has an interface." He pointed. On the side of the plinth, nearly invisible against the black surface, was a recessed slot, perfectly sized for one of our personal data slates. Beside it, a single glyph glowed. "Right." Fisher held up his own slate. "It's not asking for our lives," he said. "It's asking for our memories, that which is most precious." I climbed off Connolly. He was right. It was a more intimate, more horrifying violation than death. To have a piece of your soul carved out willingly. Fisher slotted his slate, and a holographic keyboard appeared above it. "Calculating optimal data package for relinquishment," he muttered. "A memory with high personal value but low strategic importance." He typed for a moment. A soft chime echoed. He pulled his slate out. "The memory of my first doctoral acceptance. Done." Connolly stumbled to the plinth. He had been cheated of his martyrdom. He jammed his slate into the slot and typed. Another chime. "The moment I first isolated the anomaly's energy signature," he said. "The vindication of my life's work. It is given." Abbas was next. He moved like a man already dead. He didn't even look at the keyboard, his fingers moving as if in a trance. A third chime. "Maya's birth," he whispered, and a single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. Watching her take her first breath. Then it was my turn. I stood before the plinth. What was most precious? Not Daniel's death. That was a wound, a scar. What was precious was what came before. I thought of a summer afternoon years before the mountain. We were 17, sitting on the warm hood of his beat-up truck, drinking cheap soda, talking about nothing. The smell of cut grass, the sound of his easy, unburdened laughter. The simple, perfect fact of my brother being alive. I slotted the slate and typed the coordinates of that memory. The chime sounded, and I felt a sudden, sharp emptiness, a cold spot where something warm used to be. I pulled the slate, and the man who walked away from the plinth was not the same one who had walked up to it. The wall in front of us dissolved, opening into the next chamber. We moved forward, 4 men who had just sold pieces of their souls for the privilege of taking one more step into hell. The doorway that opened was a release. After the suffocating violation of the plinth, we stepped through into a space that felt like the opposite of a chamber. It was an infinity. The first sensation was one of falling into a starless night sky. The ground beneath our feet was a narrow walkway of the same black stone, stretching forward into a colossal spherical void. There was no visible ceiling or floor, only the gentle curve of a wall so distant it felt like a horizon. The entire cavern was lit by a silver, ambient glow that emanated from the fabric of the space itself. My eyes adjusted, and I saw them. The walls of the sphere, from pole to invisible pole, were lined millions, perhaps billions, of hexagonal alcoves. They fit together in a perfect cosmic honeycomb, and in each alcove there was a specimen. To our left, floating in the exact center of its prism, was a being of pure energy, its nervous system a web of captured lightning, its form changing like a solar flare caught in a bottle. To our right, a creature that looked like an animate sculpture of obsidian and crystal, its silicon-based limbs frozen mid-gesture. We passed insectoid beings with iridescent carapaces, gas-based entities held in invisible fields like smoke in a jar, and things that had no corollary in earthly biology. Creatures of folded light, beings of woven shadow, entities that defied the very concept of a physical form. They were all perfectly still, posed like museum exhibits. They were simply held in a neutral, relaxed state. Their eyes, or the alien analogues of eyes, were open and vacant. "It's an archive." Fisher's voice was a strained whisper, stripped of his usual arrogance. He had deployed a small gecko drone, one of the six-legged mapping units, and it was crawling along the edge of the walkway, its sensors sweeping the nearest alcoves. "A biological archive of unprecedented scale." "They're not dead," Abbas said. His voice was the clinical tone of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. We had stopped before a creature that looked mammalian, covered in fur that swirled with metallic tones. Its chest did not rise or fall. "But they're not alive either. Look at the drone's readings. There's no cellular decay. But there is also a complete cessation of all biological and neurological function. It's stasis. Absolute." Connolly was weeping, but he wasn't horrified. He was enraptured. "The fossil record of souls," he breathed, his hands pressed against his helmet's visor as if trying to reach out. "A celestial choir, frozen in a single perfect moment of praise. Every species deemed worthy, preserved forever in the mind of God." His words were meant to be comforting, but they were the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. The word from my translation, the promise of the Sphinx, echoed in my mind. The worthy will be collected. This is a museum at the end of the universe. And every one of these beings, every one of these entire civilizations had made the same journey we had. They had been tested, they had been weighed, and they had been found worthy. This was their reward. I walked past thousands of alcoves, a silent graveyard of cosmic civilizations. The walkway ended. It didn't connect to another passage or a set of stairs. It simply terminated at the curved wall of the sphere. And there, directly in front of us, at the absolute terminus of our journey, was one final alcove. It was empty, identical to the billions of others, a perfect hexagonal prism of glowing crystal, but its interior was a vacant space. It was waiting, reserved, and etched into the seamless black wall just above it, so precise it seemed to have been burned into reality by a beam of light, was a single familiar glyph sequence. It was the same one the Gauntlet had used in the ethical tests to denote our species. It was a stylized, axiomatic representation of the human form. The truth crashed down, a silent psychic tidal wave that buckled the foundations of my mind. This was the prize for passing the final exam. We wouldn't be joining our makers. We wouldn't be ascending to a higher plane. We would be collected. Our entire species, our history, our art, our love, our consciousness. All of it would be painlessly deconstructed, converted into a flawless, incorruptible data point, and projected into that alcove to be preserved for eternity. Leo Fisher was the first to break. He stood staring at the empty alcove, his head cocked to one side as if listening to a complex piece of music. The gecko drone at his feet whirred, its sensors still dutifully scanning. "It's a perfect archive," he whispered, the words rattling in my helmet. "A lossless data compression of a species. It's the only logical way to preserve life against the heat death of the universe. It's the logical endpoint." He paused, a strange tremor in his voice. "So why?" he said, his voice fracturing into a choked, confused sob. "Why does it feel like a scream?" His mind, a fortress of pure reason, had just found a truth that was both mathematically perfect and existentially horrific. An elegant equation that solved for eternal silence. The paradox was a poison. I watched on my HUD as his neurological feed, the clinical graph of his brain activity, dissolved into a chaotic, red-lined scribble. He made a small, quiet sound, the noise of a circuit board shorting out. His eyes went vacant. He just switched off. He stood there, a statue of a man, his mind permanently broken by a truth it could comprehend but not withstand. Connolly, however, was transformed. He dropped to his knees in worship. He crawled the last few feet to the base of the human alcove, his gloved hands pressing against the wall beneath it. "Don't you see?" he cried, his voice ecstatic, tears streaming down his face. "You see a prison. Your mortal minds are too small. This isn't an end. It's a transfiguration, to be preserved by it, to become eternal, unchanging, a perfect and permanent part of its divine creation. It is the greatest honor the universe can bestow." His awe had curdled into a messianic zeal. He wasn't just accepting this fate. He was its newest and most fervent prophet. That left two of us. I looked at Abbas. He stood beside the catatonic fissure, his eyes clear. He saw it without the filter of logic or faith. He saw it for what it was. "It's a mausoleum," he said, his voice the weary tone of a physician who has no more good news to give. "A beautiful, perfect, eternal tomb." He was right, and in that moment the entire mission inverted. All my agonizing over the ethical frameworks, my attempts to understand the mind of our judge, it was all a waste. It wasn't a judge seeking a worthy subject. It was a cosmic curator, a taxidermist, seeking a perfect specimen. Failure was extinction by ice. Success was extinction by preservation. Two different kinds of annihilation, both absolute. "Sam," I said, my eyes locked on the empty, waiting alcove. "Our entire premise was wrong." He looked at me, a flicker of understanding in his tired eyes. "We're not trying to pass the test anymore," I said. "We're trying to escape the museum." Abbas nodded slowly, his eyes moving from the catatonic form of Leo Fisher to the worshipping figure of Peter Connolly. "Two forms of extinction," he affirmed, his voice a small, sane anchor in the cosmic madness. "Sudden death or death in a display case." "There was a contingency," I said. "A last resort, known only to myself and Director Warren. We called it the Theseus Protocol." Abbas's eyes met mine on the comms feed. There was no surprise in them, only a weary curiosity. "Theseus," he repeated, "the man who went into the labyrinth not to solve its puzzle, but to kill the monster within." "Exactly," I said. Before we entered, 2 C-12 demolition charges were placed at the base of the Sphinx, keyed to my suit's biometric command. They're designed to fracture the foundational ice. The resulting detonation will trigger a catastrophic collapse of the Thwaites ice shelf directly over our position. "You mean to bury it?" Abbas stated. "Under a few billion tons of ice," I confirmed. "It's not a solution. It's a reset. A desperate attempt to hit the snooze button and buy our species another few millennia before someone else finds it." Abbas looked around the mausoleum. "It's the only rational option left." His eyes fell on Fisher, who was still standing, his eyes fixed on some point in infinity that only he could see. "What about them?" "We take Leo with us. We don't leave anyone behind," I said. "Connolly, we try to reason with him. If we can't, we drag him out too." But as I said it, I knew it was a fool's hope. Connolly was stirring. He pushed himself up from his knees, his movements no longer reverent, but filled with a new purpose. He turned to face us, and the ecstatic awe on his face was gone. It had been replaced by the unyielding conviction of a true believer whose God had just given him a direct command. His eyes flickered between us, then to the walkway stretching back into the darkness. He had heard us. He understood what we were planning to do. He saw our escape as an act of blasphemy. "You would deny humanity its apotheosis," he whispered, his voice a dangerous hiss over the comms. "You would try to flee paradise and condemn us all to the meaningless death of mortality." His prayer was over. His new mission had just begun. He was no longer our teammate. He was the guardian of this tomb, and he would not let us desecrate it by leaving. There was no time for debate. I grabbed one of Fisher's arms, Abbas took the other, and we heaved. He was dead weight, 170 pounds of man plus another 100 of suit and life support. His head lolled, his boots dragging on the sound-absorbent stone. The race was on. Connolly didn't try to stop us. He simply turned and ran. He sprinted down the long causeway, a dark figure receding into the silver void. A new walkway materialized before us, branching off the main one. It was a direct, narrow bridge of black stone, cutting a straight line through the vast sphere, aimed at a distant point of light. We were barely 100 meters down the new path when the first sabotage hit. The section of walkway directly behind us fractured into 1,000 pieces and dissipated into nothingness. We were on an island, the path back to the gallery gone, the path forward, the only one left. "Don't you see the beauty of it?" Connolly's voice filled our helmets, no longer pleading, but instructing. He was a tour guide for the end of the world. "There is no retreat, no turning back to the messy, dying world of flesh. The only way is forward into eternity. I'm trying to save you from your own fear." We kept moving, a desperate three-legged shuffle. Ahead, Connolly had stopped. He was kneeling, his hand pressed against the surface of the walkway. "He's a geophysicist," I panted. "He understands resonance. He's convincing the path to stop existing." As I spoke, a 5-meter section of the walkway 50 meters ahead of us dissolved, just as the one behind us had. We were trapped, with a chasm in front and a void behind. "It is a holy act," Connolly's voice rang with zealous joy, "to unmake the path of the blasphemer, to ensure the chosen remain to be sanctified." "We have to jump," Abbas said. "With him?" I looked down at Fisher's limp form. It was impossible. "We get a running start," Abbas said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "On 3. We either make it or we fall forever. At least it's a choice." We backed up as far as we could on our shrinking platform. I locked my grip on Fisher's suit. "1, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. 2, accept it, Robert," Connolly pleaded. "You of all people, you who once spoke of grace. It is here. It is waiting for you." 3, I said, and we ran. A few clumsy, pounding steps, and then we launched ourselves into the void, a tangled mass of limbs. For a horrifying second, we were suspended in the silver emptiness, the billions of dead souls in their tombs watching us without eyes. We hit the other side with a jarring, bone-rattling impact. I stumbled, my ankle twisting, but I didn't fall. Abbas was already pulling Fisher the rest of the way onto the solid path. We had made it. I looked up. The point of light was closer now. A definite rectangle. The exit. And standing silhouetted against it, waiting for us, was Connolly. The sabotage was over. The final human obstacle was now in place. The final 100 meters were the heaviest. We dragged Fisher's dead weight across the stone. The threshold was no longer a distant point of light. It was a frame, and through it, I could see the painful glare of the Antarctic sun on an infinite field of white. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and blocking it was Peter Connolly. He stood with his arms spread wide, a messianic silhouette against the light of the world we were trying to reach. We stopped 10 feet from him, laying Fisher gently on the ground. "Peter," I said, "get out of the way. Don't you feel it?" His voice was calm. "The silence, the purpose. All the questions are answered. All the struggle is over. We're home." "That's not a home, Peter. It's a display case," Abbas countered. "They're not at peace, they're just off." Connolly's gaze settled on me. There was no anger in it, only a deep, bottomless well of pity. "You were a priest, Robert, a man of God. You stood at an altar and spoke of eternal life. Here it is, a true physical immortality, offered to us, and you spit on it. This isn't life. Life is messy, it's mortal. It's the right to make mistakes, to love, to grieve, to end. That thing back there, it's a period at the end of a sentence. It's not the story. It is the final perfect draft," he cried, his voice ringing with passion. "And you would burn the library to save a few flawed, tear-stained pages." I looked into his eyes. They weren't the eyes of a scientist anymore, or even the eyes of a friend. They were the luminous, impenetrable eyes of a martyr, a man who has found a truth so absolute that any other reality is an illusion. And I knew, with the certainty of a man facing his own reflection in a shattered mirror, that words were useless. The Sphinx had made its final move, not with an alien puzzle, but with a human heart. "Sam," I said, not taking my eyes off Connolly, "get Leo ready." I took a step forward. "This is your last chance, Peter. Step aside." "I can't," he whispered, a sad, genuine regret in his voice. He braced himself. "It is my sacred duty to ensure we are found worthy." I charged. It was a clumsy, ugly thing. We were 2 exhausted men in bulky 100-pound suits, and our fight was a desperate, grunting wrestle. I slammed into him, and we staggered sideways, our helmets cracking against each other with a sharp report of polycarbonate. He was strong, fueled by a righteous fire I could no longer access. He drove me back, trying to pin me against the invisible edge of the walkway. For a moment, I saw my own death in his eyes. Then, my training, the years of rote memorization of my suit's schematics kicked in. I twisted, ducking under his arm, and my hands fumbled at the side of his leg. I found the emergency release valve for his knee joint, a recessed lever designed for field repairs. I shoved my thumb into it and pushed with all my weight. There was a hydraulic hiss and a pop of stressed metal. Connolly cried out, more in surprise than in pain, and his left leg buckled under him. He collapsed onto the walkway, his leg bent. He wasn't dead, but he wasn't getting up. He looked up at me, his face filled with a kind of serene disappointment. "It's beautiful," he whispered, his gaze drifting past me into the silver void of the gallery. "Robert, we have to go," Abbas urged, already lifting Fisher. I looked down at Connolly one last time, a prophet left to worship alone in his silent heaven. Then I turned and helped Abbas drag Fisher through the threshold. The transition from the Sphinx to the physical reality of Antarctica was a sensory crucifixion. The moment we crossed the threshold, the wind hit us, a solid shrieking wall of force that tore at our suits and howled in our audio pickups. The sun, a merciless white disk in a pale sky, reflected off the endless ice with a glare so brilliant it was a physical pain, overloading my visor's light sensors. We collapsed onto the ice, dragging Fisher with us. Abbas immediately began checking his vitals. I pushed myself to one knee, the wind trying to tear me from my footing. I raised my left arm, the cuff of my AEC suit now caked with real gritty snow. I pulled up the command interface on my HUD, my fingers clumsy and stiff inside their gloves. I navigated through 3 layers of security protocols until I reached a single icon labeled Theseus. I pressed it. A new prompt appeared. Confirm biometric signature. Cole Marcus. I placed my thumb on the scanner pad on my wrist cuff. Signature confirmed. Initiate protocol. I looked over at Abbas. He had Fisher propped up against his shoulder and was already starting the brutal trudge back towards the distant sanctuary of Taro. He glanced back, saw what I was doing, and gave a single grim nod. I pressed yes. Protocol initiated. Detonation in 30 seconds. A voice in my ear began to count down. I scrambled to my feet and ran, my twisted ankles screaming. I caught up to Abbas as the countdown hit 10. We didn't look back. We kept moving, dragging the catatonic shell of Leo Fisher between us, our heads bowed against the wind. The sound reached us first through the ice itself. It was a deep, gut-thrumming crack, the sound of a world breaking. We were thrown from our feet as the entire Thwaites ice shelf buckled beneath us. We turned in time to see it. At the base of the Sphinx, 200 meters away, a jagged black fracture line spiderwebbed across the ice. The monolith, that eternal judge, hung suspended for a single moment. Then, with a roar that was not an explosion but the groan of a dying continent, the shelf gave way. Billions of tons of ancient ice, a wall 1,000 feet high, carved away and crashed downwards with the inexorable power of a geological event. The Sphinx, the examiner, the cosmic curator, didn't fight. It was simply swallowed. It disappeared into a chaotic, churning avalanche of ice and snow, a maelstrom that erased it from existence, burying it under a mountain of its own making. The ground shuddered to a halt. The roar faded, replaced once more by the shriek of the wind. Where the Sphinx had stood, there was now just a newly formed, deep chasm and a landscape of shattered, broken ice. We watched from the small, thick porthole of the HAB module an hour later. Fisher was sedated in the med bay, his mind a quiet, empty room. The comms link to McMurdo was a torrent of panicked, confused questions we didn't have the words to answer. It was just me and Abbas, two survivors staring out at the white, unmarked grave we had created. "Is it over?" Abbas asked. I thought of the billions of specimens in the gallery, of the impartial logic of the machine now sleeping beneath the ice. I thought of the empty alcove. "No," I said. "It's just sleeping." Years later, I live in a small, anonymous apartment in a city that is always loud. The noise is a comfort. The rumble of a passing train, the distant wail of a siren, the murmur of 1,000 conversations through a thin wall. They are the sounds of messy, inefficient, mortal life. They are the opposite of the silence. The official report on the loss of the Thwaites Anomaly Research Outpost is a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction. It cites an unforeseen seismic event, likely triggered by our own deep-core drilling, which led to the catastrophic collapse of the ice shelf. 4 lives were tragically lost in service to science. Connolly Peter, Fisher Leopold, and a 2-man engineering team. Abbas and I are the sole lucky survivors, pulled from the wreckage in a heroic rescue operation. The report is 300 pages long and doesn't contain a single word of truth. In the end, Project Cassandra lived up to its name. We delivered a true prophecy of an existential threat, and the world buried it under a mountain of paper. I see Sam Abbas once a month. We meet at a quiet bar downtown that smells of old wood and spilled beer. We never talk about Antarctica. We talk about the weather, about politics, about the ache in his left knee or the book I'm pretending to read. Then we just sit in the quiet, the only 2 men on Earth who know the real color of silence. He's a physician again, working with trauma patients at the VA. I visited Leo Fisher last week. He's at a private care facility in Switzerland, the best the Tellus Institute's money can buy. He looks healthy, his eyes are clear, but he doesn't speak. He just stares at the wall, and his hands resting in his lap sometimes trace patterns in the air. He is still in that first locus, I think, trying to solve a puzzle of light and geometry. He sought the source code of the universe, and he found it. It's a pity it was written in a language that breaks the human mind. I don't pray anymore. I gave that up long before the Sphinx. But I think about faith. I think about Peter Connolly, kneeling at the end of the world, embracing a truth that was a beautiful, perfect lie. I crippled him and left him to be entombed. I made an ethical calculation and chose the species over the man. It was the correct choice, the logical choice. It was the kind of choice Leo Fisher would have applauded. But it is the choice that wakes me up at night. I used to build systems to avoid tragedy. Now I know the only thing you can do is choose which tragedy you can live with. I chose our flawed, noisy, painful existence over a silent perfection. Sometimes, when the city is quiet in the hours before dawn, I pull up the live feeds of West Antarctica. I look at the new topography of the Thwaites Glacier, at the kilometers of fresh ice that cover the tomb. I tell myself we bought the world 1,000 years, maybe 10,000. But I know it is a temporary solution. I am not a hero. I am not a savior. I am just a man who ran out the clock, a watchman waiting for a thaw. It is patient, and the ice is melting.